And your hosts today are AK.
And Ivana Rosendal.
Yes. And have you ever sat in a meeting that felt like it could have been an email, or maybe even nothing? Or maybe you've been in a meeting where your CEO announced the newest transformation program, but it sounded a lot like the one from last year, just with a new name. This is our first book swap episode, and we are so pleased to have you, Paul Sweeney, on the call with us. You're the author of the book Magnetic Nonsense, and you're here to discuss together with us what you call magnetic nonsense. And we'll be unpacking this topic of bullshit at work with you in the context of Marie's story in Manuring Monday. And
Fantastic.
maybe, Ivana, you can, it's so great to have you. Maybe you can tell us how you found out about magnetic nonsense.
Yeah, so I was on vacation at the North Sea, which is one of my favorite holiday spots to go in Denmark. And I was just like randomly looking around on Kindle, what is happening, and then I fell over your book, and I was like, then I read like the little intro section. I was like, oh my god, this sounds like something I must read. Then I downloaded it, and I was a little bit less present during that vacation than I would have liked because I just kind of dove into your your story, and like oh my god was kind of the theme of how it felt to read it, because everything you write is so true, so horrible, and a little bit disheartening about the state of work, but but absolutely true. And then I messaged you and asked if you would be willing to come on our show, and you actually said
Yeah.
yes. So yay!
Yay!
Yeah, no, it's great. And obviously then you sent me your book, which I loved, and I thought, what a fascinating book. Why I really enjoyed it. I was telling you, I was kind of left hanging a bit when it was finished. I was like, oh no, don't finish here. I want to see what happened. But then that's life, right? It's like you don't always have the Disney ending. So yeah,
Exactly.
but I really loved it. It was a great read. I've read it again since,
Oh,
and I really liked it.
Thank you.
that is quite the honor.
Paul, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about how you came to see that all the bullshit at work?
Yeah, yeah. So really quickly, I guess I had a strange career. I flunked out of university. My first job was in the lost baggage department of an airline, which was tremendous fun. And then I worked in many middle management roles before doing an MBA, working in a startup for a while, then accidentally as a management consultant for about 12 years. And then my sort of last corporate gig was chief strategy officer of a big real estate company here in the FTSE 100. So I've sort of worked right at the bottom of organizations all the way through the middle, and then seen many of them as a consultant, and laterally sort of worked at the top of an organization. But somewhere along that way, I was a bit like the kid from the Sixth Sense movie who started to see dead people everywhere. And I just kept seeing the same crap and nonsense, and the same weird language and the same idiotic things going on in every company of any
Mm.
size. And I guess I've been kind of thinking about it for a while. And then when I finished that job, the corporate job, I had a chance to take some time off, and I thought, I'm actually going to sit down and try to figure out why all this nonsense happens. And is there a reason why no one ever seems to do anything about it? And that was kind of, then I spent a year laughing to myself in the corner writing this book. And I was pretty sure no one would ever read it. But it turns out a few people have read it, and the feedback's been really interesting. There's a theme. There was a guy called Carl Christian from Norway. He really made me laugh. He contacted me and said, I've had to stop reading your book. It's too painful.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. I was about to
you know,
say it's.
yeah, yeah. He said, because, all the things that I've been promoting for the last 20 years, like I've suddenly realized
Yeah,
it's all wrong, and it's really
yeah,
uncomfortable. So there's this
exactly.
kind of,
That's how I felt in some
yeah,
parts too.
yeah. So I think the audience kind of self-selects because it's either people who are willing to be thoughtful and challenge their views, or they're looking at it going, I don't know what you're talking about. You're crazy. So yeah, it's been kind of fun.
I don't want to know. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's easier not to
thank you.
not to think about it, right? Yeah, in some ways.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that also when Ivana told me about this book and I've read your book, I felt like it was such a great connection to Manuring Monday because I think that you kind of
Yeah.
diagnose all these absurdities of modern organization, whereas we have tried to write a story about someone living these absurdities and like
Yeah.
trying to navigate all these dysfunctions. And I feel like it's
Yeah.
both
Yeah.
books kind of have this really uncomfortable truth, as you say, that organizations are just full of
Yeah.
smart people doing really dumb things.
Yeah, I know. And that actually the thing I loved about your book as well is it really in my book I talk a bit about one of the things we could learn from is complexity theory and
Hmm.
we constantly oversimplify the world to give us comfort, but I think one of the great things about your book is it just shows how complex how much more complex everything is than people think, and they're
Hmm.
and much more human as well, right? So it's messy. That's what I loved about
Yeah,
your book. It's like it's gloriously messy. Everyone has their preconceptions, but also a lot of it is wrong. Everyone has their personal lives, things that they didn't know about each other. It's just
yeah.
really nice and messy. I like it.
Exactly. Yeah. We tried to show exactly that. And hopefully
Yeah.
people could recognize that feeling of like, I try so hard to do the best thing and it's still just, it was maybe the right thing, but it still failed because of the
Yeah,
complexity of
or was
human
it the right?
behavior.
Was it the right thing? Is the
Yeah, yeah,
question.
Mm.
What is the right thing?
Yeah, true.
It's really an
Yeah,
interesting yeah, it's an interesting discussion.
yeah,
yeah. And the system changes. Like once you impact it in one way or another, and the system is different, and then even though it might have
Yeah,
been the right maneuver,
yeah,
it may end up not being the right maneuver.
yeah. It's always fun trying to figure out what the unintended consequences are, right? You change an incentive to try to get people to behave in a certain way, and then you get this completely crazy outcome. It's I've seen this in a bank where they wanted is a commercial bank, so dealing with businesses, and they wanted the relationship managers to be more customer focused. So they changed their bonus. So a big chunk of their bonus was based on the customer net promoter score. But instead of actually making them more customer focused, they then spent all their time canvassing the customer for the score. And they would even ring up the customers and say, "Well, I know you didn't get that loan, but it wasn't my fault. So can you please give me my NPS
Oh,
score?" And they actually
oh.
spent most of their time after that just trying to get the score, which is wasn't really what they wanted from the change. But it always amuses me that when people don't realize that humans are good at gaming stuff, right?
Yeah,
And if you
exactly.
if you for if you force them into a place where you incentivize them like children, then they're going to behave like children.
Yeah, and it
Yeah.
becomes more about the game than actually the value that
Yeah,
they were
Yeah.
supposed to create. Yeah,
Yeah, totally,
yeah.
totally. Always funny.
yeah. I had a similar experience with a delivery driver who had a very hard time finding my address. So
Mm.
I went down to the street and was like trying to find him eventually. And then like 15 minutes later, I found out where he was. And
Yeah.
the first thing he said to me like, "Please give me 5 stars." I did my best.
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy. It's completely crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Uh,
so I think maybe for listeners who are more here to hear Paul and didn't read Manuring Monday, I will just give a little a little recap of that story, and then
Mm.
maybe Paul afterwards we could hear a recap of your book,
Sure.
just to set the stage before we dive into to the book swap session where we will talk about how we can apply the learnings from Magnetic Nonsense to Marie's journey.
Yeah.
And in Manuring Monday, I will try to do this without spoiling the whole thing.
Yeah.
But as we just briefly touched upon, it's a story about the head of development HR, Marie, who is working in this company. Everything is completely fictional. Called Zebra Apps. It's an edtech company. And in the beginning of the book, we established that there's a problem with people leaving Zebra Apps. And Marie has a background in management consulting. She's working in HR, and she's tasked with finding out why people leave and eventually fixing this problem and trying to get the company back on track. And uh, and she then launches a culture program, um, thinking that this is the right thing to do. But in this journey of trying to do this, she learns so many things about why the company is really dysfunctional, and that actually the problem is a lot more serious, or a lot more, yeah, important than only retaining or yeah, keeping the talent. So there's all these learning, as we talked about, with how people have their own agendas, um, and how, yeah, there's a lot of good intentions, but there's just so much trouble in all departments, basically, and especially one
Yeah.
department that Marie eventually joins and tries to fix the problem from within. And yeah, I think that's the overall story. Ivana, do
It's
you
a
have
great,
anything to add?
it's a great story. I loved it.
Thanks.
I think that's a great recap. And then stuff happens.
Yeah.
Yeah, so much stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah,
indeed.
yeah.
Well, Paul, would you tell us like a brief overview of Magellan's nonsense for people who might not have read it?
Yeah, so I gave a talk about this the other day, so it's in my mind. So I guess in the world we have a very consistent narrative about what we think we need to make organizations great. And it's, nobody really argues about it. And it goes like this. You just need the right leader with the right stuff, with the right values to create this culture, you know, that makes everyone behave in an amazing way. And then we can throw in some sprinkling of well-being and performance management and diversity. And, and that's kind of the answer, right? So if we just get those things right, then, then everyone should be like, it should be just amazing. Um, and, to back that up, we have 150 years of studying leadership now, about 75 years of studying culture since the term culture was invented by a Canadian management consultant. And and we have endless MBAs and leadership development programs, and in the UK we have over 50,000 executive coaches on LinkedIn, and 92,000 people claiming that they're culture change experts. Okay, so but there's only one problem with all of this stuff is that none of it works. And so if you look at what you have endless corporate scandals, every year. Companies behaving really badly, damaging the environment, making unethical decisions. You have, according to Gallup, whose methods I don't really like, but even if they are directionally correct, in the UK, only 1 in 10 employees is actually engaged at work. You have other research coming out from mental health foundations saying 96% of people had at least one burnout in the last 12 months. So you have you know, all this dysfunction, all this bad behavior, all this unhappiness, but yet no one ever steps back and says, "But okay, wow, if all that stuff we keep on talking about isn't actually doing anything, shouldn't we try, shouldn't we try something else?" So so that was kind of the start of the book, was thinking, well, why is it we believe all this stuff? And that led me down a number of roads. One, it turns out that we have some cognitive biases that are a hangover from evolution, really. And there are three that are really interesting. One is a massive aversion to uncertainty. So, if you were a really honest CEO, you'd probably say, actually, you know what? I've got no idea what it's going to take to make this company better. Why don't we go and play with some stuff? But nobody wants to hear that because we like the illusion of certainty that CEOs give us, even though they're just ordinary people and they know no more than we do. And there was interesting research in London, University College London's neuroscience department. They asked people to play this game, a video game where you had to look underneath rocks, and if there was a snake underneath the rock, you got an electric shock, which was uncomfortable, not lethal, but uncomfortable. And as the game progressed, people got better at predicting which rocks had snakes under them. And all the time they were being monitored, with cortisol, sweat levels, pupil dilation, stuff like that. Very sophisticated modeling. And then the game changed so that it became less easy to predict whether the snake was under the rock. And the really interesting thing in the experiment, it turned out that it was way more stressful not knowing whether you were going to get an electric shock than knowing that you were. Isn't
Oh
that
wow.
interesting?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Makes
if
sense.
yeah, and it's like, I guess if if you go to the train station and you get one of those, your train is delayed and this it's really hard to figure out when it's going to go. That's more stressful than knowing your train is being cancelled, even though the outcome might be worse, right? Um, then we have this other deep human need for sense making, which some scientists are now saying it should be recognized as a stronger human drive as the drive for food or sex. Every early human civilization has got a creation myth, for example, that explained to the people how did we get here, what was it all about, what were the sun and the moon and the stars doing. We have this deep need for sense making. But those two things, the aversion to uncertainty and the deep need for sense making, they leave us open to incredibly simple explanations of the past. Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel Prize winning economist, he put it much better than me. He said the illusion that we've understood the past feeds the further illusion that we could predict and control the future. And so that's really quite interesting. And then the third bias is this thing called belief perseverance, where once we form these ideas, for example, about leadership and culture and values, even in the face of really overwhelming evidence that they don't work, we're still incredibly reluctant to let them go. And it almost requires a crazy avalanche of evidence, where it's too much, but we don't like to let these things go. So there's all that going on, and then and then the book gets into all the things, all the kind of scaffolding that holds this stuff in place. So this Disneyfication of leadership that I call it, the hero leadership cult. Great servant leader will save us. They just need to start with why. Simon Sinek's crap. Um, and so we got this weird Disney nonsense going on. We've got this concept of culture that really makes me laugh because, as I say, it was only invented in the 1950s. No one had ever heard of it before that. And there's not really much evidence that culture exists, but yet everyone talks about it as if it's a thing. And what I think it does is it makes us incredibly intellectually lazy because every time a company does something bad, the answer is, oh, it was the culture. So we've created this kind of abstraction layer that allows us to point the finger at this thing and then say, the answer to the problem is to change the culture. But if culture isn't even a real thing, then we're just pointing the finger at something kind of imaginary, right? And in my book, I draw the parallel between culture and witchcraft in the 15th century in the UK, where everyone believed witches were real, to the extent that the British or the English Parliament at the time passed two laws making the practice of witchcraft punishable by death. And then they executed 300 women in the following several years on the pretext of being witches. So yeah, it's interesting. And so this whole kind of the leadership thing, the culture thing, all this nonsense about values, which I know featured in the book, but there are all these things that don't make any difference, but we spend vast amounts of time thinking that they do. And then it's all held up by leadership development, MBA teaching. There's a kind of a cycle. It all just goes round and round and round. And then we reward people that conform to it all. We don't look for the mavericks or the people with a different perspective. Yeah. So the book, there's a lot in the book, but it sort of goes through a lot of stuff around why it's all nonsense, and then makes some suggestions for some stuff we could do different. I mean, I certainly wasn't going to fall into the trap of the consulting nonsense in the book of all you need to do is this a 10 steps to
But
success,
yeah,
or
follow this model, then you will
yeah,
succeed.
a
Yeah.
2 by 2 matrix.
Yes.
Yeah, but
Oh,
the book does finish with yeah, it took me a while to figure out how to finish it, but it finishes with an open letter to the CEO, which is saying, look, the the bad news is your organization is really dysfunctional. The good news is you're not special.
Yeah.
And therefore, here's a whole bunch of things that you might want to think about testing and trying differently. I don't know, they're not the answer necessarily, but it's a good start. Yeah. So that's kind of how the book flows.
And I love the conclusion also because like in life I think that is also the conclusion that I have arrived
Mhm.
at. That's well, there is no guide, there are no 10 steps,
Yeah.
but we can
No,
try
no.
things and things can be incrementally better than they were before, even though
Yeah.
we might
And
not solve for everything.
no, no. And that's, I mean, if you could solve everything, life would be really boring, right? What would you
It's
do? What would you do then? Um,
Yeah.
but the interesting, I mean, one of the really interesting things for me is that we have a system of organizing. Oh, I should have mentioned also, yeah, the book talks a lot about power as
Mhm.
the real culprit to some of this
Yes.
dysfunction, instead of culture, which is a kind of a largely made up and silly idea. Um, but the one of the really fascinating things is that our organizational thinking, the evolution of our thinking, seems to have stopped around the 1950s or 60s. And so few organizations actually try experimenting with a different way of organizing themselves, which I think is really hilarious because they all talk about innovation and creativity and being agile, but then they all run as if they were still in the 1950s with these hierarchical models of command control, parent child, systems. Um, yeah, so I find this really interesting that very few people ever even think about trying anything different.
Yeah, that is. It's almost you compare it to witchcraft. For me, it
Yeah,
also like makes me think of during the plague where we had the Wright brothers who were just
yeah,
whipping themselves, trying to
yeah,
absolute themselves from sin because they wanted to do something and make sense of what was happening around them and have some agency.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Like,
And yeah, it's just the whole thing is endlessly curious to me.
yeah, um, yes. I want to dive more into this management consultant part because you were an accidental management consultant. I was also an accidental management consultant for
Me
Yeah,
too.
5 years. Yeah,
yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
and it,
yeah, so consulting is a really interesting thing. And in the book, I kind of I had to go at working out why it works, and it's based on those cognitive biases, right? So I came up with a kind of a nonsense framework, which I think consultants use. Maybe not completely knowingly, but it's very fun, and it goes like this. It says like step one is trigger our aversion to uncertainty.
mhm,
So that might be, for example, oh, if you're not deploying AI all over your company, it's too late. You're going to get left behind.
yeah,
Everyone's already gone. All your competitors are ahead of you. So
mhm,
so we create this kind of a big trigger for uncertainty. Step two is give the illusion of sense making, which is, well,
yeah,
we understand all this stuff. Yeah, we're expert consultants. We know everything about AI, which really is quite funny because even the people who built the models don't know how they work. But that's just an
yes,
inconvenience. Um, and then step three is promise control over the future. So hire us,
yeah,
we'll shape your AI strategy, and we'll make sure that you are amazing and you'll outperform all your competitors. So there's this kind of this is the messaging,
yeah,
and it was the same with, I talked in the book, it was very funny, the metaverse, which no one's talking
mhm,
about now. 3 years ago, all the Accenture was saying it'll be worth $30 billion a year, the metaverse economy, and 50% of all transactions will be impacted by it, and they created all this panic. It's like, oh
mhm,
no, what is it? What is this thing? Help, help! I'm like, I don't want to get left. I don't want to get left behind. And then they persuaded their clients to invest in all kinds of nonsense like buying virtual land in the metaverse. And then when it all fell
yeah,
apart and is now all worthless, I'm pretty sure all the consultants just did a search and replace for metaverse and replace it with AI in their job descriptions and
yeah,
thinking, and just pretended that it never happened. So
yeah,
it's curious. Now, having said that, um, there are a whole bunch of smart people working in consulting, and when you do get good consultants, they won't
mhm,
come along and rely on the same framework, that they used 20 other times. they'll actually, if you get good ones, they'll actually be thoughtful and help you challenge your thinking and test new things. But the consulting machine doesn't produce many of those.
No.
It produces a lot of clones rolling out
Yeah.
the same old stuff. So it's a curious thing. And then what the consulting firms are very good at, McKinsey's model actually is not really consulting. It's alumni management. So
Yes.
McKinsey has this brand. I think if you're a McKinsey consultant, you have better odds than any employee of any other company of becoming a CEO in a big company later. Um, for some reason, even though most of their stuff is quite bad, they have this brand. Their consultants are sought after in industry. They get into senior positions, and then they call up their buddies and bring them in again, and it just goes round and round. Same with MBAs. But yeah, consulting, it's a curious thing, and people are saying now the model is dying. A bunch of stuff will be replaced by AI. I don't think it's dying. I think there will always be people that fall for the three-step framework.
Yeah.
It'll always be a safe option for executives who can tell their boards that they're bringing in a McKinsey or an Accenture, to do something. Yeah, I don't like it. I think it's bad for society. I think it's bad for the world, as a model. And yeah, I mean, I hope it dies, but I'm not convinced it will.
I don't think it'll die, also because it is ingrained in the system, as you were mentioning. One of the
Yeah,
like tropes of the business fable genre is that there is this very wise external party that comes
yeah,
into a company that has all the answers, that has
yeah,
the motto, kind of like the consultants. And one of the
yeah,
things we didn't want to do for Maneuvering Monday is have like that all-knowing person.
yeah, yeah,
We
yeah,
do
yeah,
kind
yeah,
of tease the audience with introducing Anne,
yeah,
who is now a consultant, but who used to work for Zebra Apps, who gives
yeah,
Marie a bunch of advice.
yeah, yeah,
And I
yeah.
will not spoil whether that advice is actually useful or not. You
It's a
have,
really interesting dynamic, and
Yeah.
I love in the book that that Marie like does a double take almost when she sees Anne dressed in like this power suit and now looking like a consultant instead of jeans and a t-shirt when she was
Yeah.
a tech person.
Yeah.
I think
Exactly.
that was a nice touch.
But I think
Yeah.
we do have a theme there around like Marie coming from a background in management, more classic management consulting, where she tries to
Mm.
apply this toolbox that she learned, whereas Anne came from, a role in the work in Zebra Apps, and she now
Yeah.
uses her
Yeah. Yeah.
experience with that to advise Marie.
Yeah.
So what do you think of
Oh
this,
yeah.
you can say like
I
dynamic of
yeah.
observing from the outside or actually joining like the engineering department to try to
Yeah.
change things from the inside?
So I would probably say the best consultants I've worked with were the ones who had quite a lot of industry experience and then went into consulting. The worst ones I worked with were the ones who went straight in from university into consulting
yeah,
and never really had a proper job. And when I was a consultant, I found it really useful having had that experience. Working in airlines, working with crazy people, working in heavily unionized environments. You just learn a lot about how people think, behave, and that experience really helps you later. Um, but I think I would have struggled if I'd just gone into consulting straight out of university because where's your kind of reference points? Where's your experience? So that I think it just doesn't work. And
yeah. I've
the other
seen a
thing,
lot of
I go on, go on, Ivana.
I've seen a lot of consultants who did come straight from university who failed to
Mm.
understand like the complexity of an organization and
Yeah,
assume that
yeah,
we
yeah,
have found the best way. Now you just need to do
yeah,
it. The, both
yeah.
the doing it is the hard part.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, anyone can work out the spreadsheet. It's
Yeah,
yeah, getting people to do something different is always the interesting bit.
yeah,
So yeah, no, I definitely have some sympathy for that view that actually you need to get into the work because otherwise it's just theoretical. If you're just moving boxes around in an org chart, you're just kidding yourself really.
yeah.
And it's funny how if you look at the very big companies. I don't know what it's like in Denmark, but if I look at the big banks, the big insurance companies, the big utility companies, I mean, they've had 20 years of giant investment in consulting firm transformation projects, and and yet they still can't answer the phone and give you, a simple a simple answer to your query. It's if anything, they've gone backwards.
Yeah.
But no one ever kind of says, well, hang on, yeah, we spent £10 billion over the last 10 years with McKinsey or Accenture or whatever, um, but our Trustpilot score is still one. It's like, which was the case in Lloyd's Bank. Their Trustpilot score is 1.6, one being the
Oh
lowest.
wow.
And they keep droning on about, how they're creating exceptional customer experiences through transformation. And, but no one's told their customers.
Yeah.
They still think
I don't know.
they still think it's hopeless. Yeah. Yeah, it's really quite funny. Yeah.
Paul, what about like having looked around and realized that well, corporations are naked?
Yeah.
Like, what does one do? Like, advising is one thing, leading
Yeah.
is another, but then you end up with having to deal with all the bullshit that's already there. What is one to do?
Yeah. It, it's a really interesting question. I think um, my 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 feeling is that y- it's helpful to be a bit more evidence led, right? So
Hmm.
if you could get, I mean, fundamentally, companies I think are in this mess because of a huge lack of critical thinking. It's just this sort of mindless conformity to all these um, so-called best practice.
Hmm.
And I described my definition of magnetic nonsense is a strange dimension we're in where best practice reliably leads to worst outcomes. but but no one ever questions it. Um, so there is just something about if you could get leadership teams to step back for a minute and go, okay, this is what we believe. Where's the evidence?
Hmm.
And what does it say? Uh, brilliant things like every company invests heavily in well-being, which I'm actually pretty sure is part of the problem that we spend all our time kind of subliminally telling people they should be on well
Yeah.
because we keep on talking about well-being and mental first aiders and stress and resilience. But Oxford University did a very large study in 2023 looking at about 40,000 employees in the UK that all had access to your typical well-being interventions, stress and resilience training, mindfulness, mental first aiders, all this other stuff. And their conclusion was that none of it made any difference to anybody, apart from if you put your people through stress and resilience training, you make them more stressed and less resilient. That was the finding.
Oh God.
So you just have, so you have this giant industry of stuff that's going on, and it makes no difference.
Yeah.
Performance management is the same, incredibly biased and useless. Employee engagement surveys are a waste of time. There's all this noise and stuff going on that
Yeah.
just saps the energy out of companies and costs a lot of money. I know you in the book I guess Marie kind of used the values as a bit of a way to have to start having the conversation, didn't she?
Well, she is
But
from
again,
a consulting company.
yeah, yeah. But I think values are particularly hilarious as it goes, because not only is there no evidence that values um, change people's behavior, there's a ton of evidence that they made absolutely no difference when people did behave badly. And it's almost comical, in fact. If you look at Wells Fargo, I think their values were what's right for the customer, ethics, and leadership. And they were fined $3 billion for spuriously opening fake customer accounts
Oh
to
Jesus.
hit their targets. So they did what was wrong for the customer, was
Yeah.
unethical, and was appalling leadership.
Yes.
Um, Boeing's values were safety, quality, and integrity, and they've been fined $2.5 billion for deliberately covering up safety and quality issues that are implicated in the deaths of nearly 400 people with plane crashes. It's kind of it's almost beyond belief that we think somehow that values make a difference. And I've come to the conclusion that um, when you have power and when you have perverse incentives, there are no values that will stand up to those things. Those things will win. So, in my view, you're much better off trying to figure out what to do about that than launching another values program.
Yeah.
And I think this is actually where we have been on our own kind of in our own process when we wrote this book, because when we started
Mm,
out, our initial
yeah.
idea was actually to write a book about cultural transformation and how you can kind
Mm,
of work with culture in a more tangible way, how you can try to take
yeah.
this really intangible concept and actually do something and try to focus more on the behavioral part. Um, and then we started writing the book, and we got all these great expert guests in our podcast to give us feedback.
Yeah.
And we also slowly kind of found out that it's not, it wasn't really working with this culture program. And Marie had to
No.
do something different, and we had to
Yeah,
pivot,
yeah.
and we had to come into this whole
Yeah.
other part about the book about the structure and the system and
Yeah.
how we're
Yeah.
organized, and as you say about all the power dynamics and
Yeah. And it's really
yeah.
interesting in the book, I think, when one of the most interesting things I thought in the book was when the engineers, they kind of sabotaged the company
Hmm.
in a way, right? Because they were told to code and not meet and all that stuff, but they could have easily resisted that and worked around it.
Yeah.
But it's almost like they went, well, if you want to do that, then we're going to let you run this company into
Mhm.
the ground.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a curious dynamic there. I think that's a lot of the time the people at the bottom of the hierarchy uh, don't seem to understand that they have more collective power than they think. And they could have overturned that situation if they'd really wanted to, right?
Mm.
If they worked together, but yet they almost behave like children, right? It's like, you told us we can't do this, so now we're going to make sure nothing works. It's kind of
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So that was a really interesting power dynamic in the book, I thought.
Yeah, and this is one of the things when we were writing the book and we had these guest experts come in on the show and comment.
Mm,
Several of them said like this is completely unacceptable. That like at least in the end there's this coalition of employees who do try, well, employees and people outside of the company, uh,
yeah,
who try to kind of remedy the destiny of zebra apps.
yeah.
And a lot of our guest experts were like, "This is unacceptable. The leadership
Right?
and the board are the leaders, and they should follow like this the strict distribution of power as per paper."
Yeah.
Uh,
But that's clearly why things were going wrong, right? And
yes,
and what
yes,
makes us, it's what it always kind of strikes me curious is you have an organization with hundreds or even thousands of smart people in it. Why do we think that one or two people or three people are qualified to make all the decisions
yeah,
and about the future of the company? It's really bizarre. Yeah, it's a really funny thing, but we love it. We love this idea of heroic leaders, mainly white middle-aged men, in reality, who are charismatic, tall mostly, and are just going to save everybody because they're so amazing. And
Mm.
yeah, and despite the fact that it never works, we just go and hire the next one, right? I ended up in a conversation with the new CEO of Unilever the other week because he was interviewed by Barclays in London at an event, and the Barclays guy put this post on LinkedIn saying, "Oh, this is great. Look how decisive, this guy is. He's like waging war on mediocrity. He's going to drive accountability, all the usual shit." And in my book, I basically said, for some reason, no matter how much you pay these guys, they can only ever come up with one of these 10 ideas. And I said, "Oh, look, here's Fernando. He's chosen, 4, 7, 8, and 9. It's like, why are they never able to come up with an idea of their own?" Um, and I kind of said, I tagged him and said, you said you're waging war on mediocrity, but your plan is the definition of mediocre, my friend. And then I saw he looked at my profile, so I sent him a note saying, "You're probably wondering who this asshole is that called you mediocre. But here's what you should, here's what you should think about." And
yeah,
Mm.
he did say he was going to buy the book and have a read, but we'll see.
That's a
Yeah,
good
we'll
start.
see if he does. Yeah.
But Paul, I do want to ask you because I hear that you are very much against the concept of defining corporate cultural values and trying to like roll them out. But
Yeah,
then in your perspective, like how do you set an expectation for the behavior you would like to see in the company? Is it just about the leaders having this behavior, or is there
no.
anything else you can do?
So firstly, I would say it's sort of an odd thing, right? Because I guess my general feeling is that most people at work are adults who are perfectly sensible, who have a very good sense of what's right and wrong, which they manage their own lives perfectly well with. So why do we have to tell them how to behave?
Hmm.
It's just kind of weird, right? Yeah, I mean, nobody has to tell me to behave how to behave at work, or I just kind of there are norms, there are yeah, I have a pretty good sense of what's right and wrong, what's ethical and what's not ethical. So, firstly, I think the whole concept is curious. Um, I did find, oh, there's a Dutch mortgage broker called Visi, which is an interesting company. And the guy there said, the CEO there said, yeah, I couldn't be bothered with all this values and culture nonsense. I went back and looked at religion and philosophy, and it seems that almost every religion has a very similar kind of rule, which is basically translated as treat other people like you want to be treated yourself. So he said that's our kind of one, statement we have. We encourage people to think about that from the point of view of the customer, as well as their colleagues, and everybody seems to kind of get it, And I think that's nice. It's simple, you know, but they
Mm.
trust people to get on with it. It's yeah, as I say, I find the question weirdly parent-child. How do we get people to
Mm.
behave? It's kind of,
I think
they're all adults. Yeah,
I think of it more in the way as we talked about before, a really great idea to have in the work is critical thinking.
yeah,
But maybe
yeah, yeah,
that's hard for some people. So how do you kind of facilitate that people
yeah,
have critical thinking in their daily work? How do you tell them that that's what you expect without
yeah.
being
I, I,
like a
I do.
parent to a child?
Yeah,
Hmm.
it is tricky because the hierarchy makes it often makes it reasonably unsafe to be a critical thinker. Yeah,
Mm.
um, particularly if you're going to be critical of the ideas of your superiors, which are often really dumb. So there are some ways. I think you could train people to think critically, and Ireland has done that in interesting. So they have these kind of citizens forums where the government seeks help on trying to formulate policy on difficult decisions.
Hmm.
So they gather kind of 100 people or so that are broadly representative of the population, and then the first thing they do is give them critical thinking training before they look at the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now it isn't just everyone's opinions against everyone else's opinions; they're actually thinking properly about it. So
Hmm.
so I think it's an essential part of leadership development. Most leadership development is a complete waste of time. This probably would be useful.
Hmm.
Um, you can also do things like one of the things I mentioned in the book. If you are designing a change program or a transformation program, or something like Marie was trying to do, um, you can use this thing called a pre-mortem, which I think is good fun, which gives people permission. Because what you can do there, you get your team in a room and you say, right, it's 2 years' time, and our culture change program has been a complete car crash. It's totally failed. Everyone thinks it's the biggest heap of crap we've ever seen. It's been a disaster. Now let's try to figure out what happened.
Hmm.
Yeah, and changing that kind of narrative gives people permission to voice the concerns they didn't want to talk about before.
Hmm.
So that's a pretty good aid, I think, to critical thinking. Is once you get those juices flowing,
Mm.
it's the other thing I've seen work is there's a system called holocracy. Don't know if you guys have come across that.
Hmm.
It's
Yes.
I find it a bit intense, but one of the things I loved about it was their meetings are facilitated, and in the meeting, they make everybody sort of be quiet while other people are
Hmm.
talking. You can voice the fact that you have an issue. I think they call it a tension, and then that you might have a proposal. But then the facilitator goes through a series of questions, which are like, well, you know, do you have any data to back that up, or is it just your
Yeah.
opinion? You know,
Yeah.
and it's a really interesting process that takes away some of the hierarchy and noise and status, and asks some very difficult
Hmm.
questions. and and then there are some very, if somebody objects to something, one of the questions then is, well, okay, if that's just based on your opinion, we either overrule it, or is there a way we can test this proposal on a small scale to see if you're right or wrong? So there's just a more, it's a more intelligent way of running meetings, I think. So there's something about that too. So if you combined critical thinking with a very different way to run some of these meetings, I think you might be able to make some progress, I think.
I think like this the I do want to dive a little bit deeper into this culture aspect, or at least like how do we
Yeah.
define how we behave together? Because,
So,
for example, AK and I,
yeah,
we have actually like sat down and defined, well, how are we going to behave together in this project that is Maneuvering Monday?
yeah,
For example, like a key parameter is it's always okay to like that kids interrupt and are involved because
yeah,
we both have
yeah,
families,
yeah,
and that has
yeah,
to be okay.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And what else we've got? That we distribute the work according to who finds it the most fun.
yeah,
Uh, and
yeah.
there are other rules that.
Wouldn't by the way, I think that's a great rule for most work, because it's so
Yes.
who's got the most energy to do this? It
Yes.
would be a
Yeah.
great question. Um, so yeah, the whole thing about culture gets confused, right?
Yeah.
We can't see culture, we can't touch it, we can't even define it. There's um, the the CIPD, which is the UK's governing body for HR people, which is one of the most useless organizations in the world. But they occasionally do something accidentally good. And one thing they did was they commissioned the Center for Evidence-Based Management to do a big study on all the academic research about culture and whether there's a link between culture and performance. And the paper is really fascinating, and it comes up with three conclusions. It says the first conclusion is there's no consensus on what the term corporate culture even means, and or whether it exists. The second conclusion was that even if there was a link between something called culture and organizational performance, it's too weak to be statistically significant. And the third conclusion of the report was that no evidence is found to suggest that trying to change the culture ever improved anyone's performance. So those are pretty fun findings. So I guess what I would say is I'm not sure we need this idea of culture. The thing we can see is behavior. So we
Yes.
can
Yeah,
see how people behave.
exactly.
We can see that people behave differently in different contexts. What's really interesting is there are super predictable behaviors that derive from power and status. And this is where it gets interesting. If, you know, in the UK, if a big company implodes in a scandal, they'll eventually convene a public inquiry of some kind, normally overseen by some crusty old lord or lady, something or other, who's about a million years old. Um, and it costs millions, but I could save them all the money because the output is always identical. It was the culture. That's the output.
Oh God.
Always, it's the same thing every time. It's hilarious. Um, and but the behaviors you see are the ones that are entirely predicted by power. So there's a guy called Paul Piff runs a morality lab in University of California, Irvine, and his research is really interesting. And so it predicts that with if you give people too much power, they'll become detached from reality over time. They'll lose their empathy for the common people. They'll start to make decisions that favor themselves. They'll think they're smarter than everybody else, and they're more likely to condone unethical behavior over time. Now, aren't these all the behaviors that we blame on culture every time? Yeah,
Yes.
and isn't that kind of interesting, right? That we blame this abstract thing called culture, but there's plenty of evidence to show that it's the hierarchy of power that causes it. It's not the culture. And if it was culture, we wouldn't see the same behavior every time because it should be different, right? In theory. Um,
Yeah.
so this is sort of interesting. So I would say let's stop talking about culture. Let's talk about behavior. Let's talk about power. Let's try to figure out, with some experimentation, if we change the power dynamics, do we get a different set of behaviors? Would be fascinating. And there's a reasonable amount of evidence from companies that have moved to much more um, flat models of hierarchy, much more self-organizing teams. There's a
Mm.
reasonable there's a reasonable bunch of evidence there that that works really well, and makes people happier, costs less, and has better outcomes.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it has gone crazy now, this cult of leadership thing. I think in the Fortune 100 in the US now, the some time ago, the average, or the median pay of the CEO, when you include all the stock options and stuff, is now about 450 times the average employee.
Wow.
It's completely crazy. Yeah, and what do you get for it? One of 10 ideas that are on this list in the
Nonsense.
book. Nothing else.
Magnetic
No,
nonsense. Yeah.
nothing. Yeah, nothing else. Yeah. So I've come to the conclusion that culture is an unhelpful thing
Yeah.
because it gives us something that's lazily blamable
Hmm.
for things
Mm.
that go wrong,
Mm.
and it diverts us from looking at what are more likely suspects, I think.
Yeah. I think that's
Yeah.
a great conclusion. Let's talk about power
Mm.
then.
Yeah. Power is fascinating. So this guy I mentioned, Paul Piff in California, he's done some really interesting experiments. My favorite was he sent his researchers out to a pedestrian crossing in California, and told them to try to cross the road. And in doing so, they were to categorize the cars coming down the road. Category zero, I think, being the cheapest, oldest cars, up to
Mm.
category five, which are the really expensive, typical executive sort of cars, your, high end stuff. And then they set about trying to cross the road, and 0% of the cheapest cars failed to stop and yield. 45% of the most expensive cars just drove right through them as if they weren't there. And I thought, wow, this is really, really fascinating. The other thing we didn't touch on was also all of the management literature, the success books, the MBA teaching, everything else. It completely ignores things like serendipity and random
Hmm.
chance and good luck. It's completely as if those things don't exist, but arguably they are hugely important in business success. Um, and one of his other experiments was he would get pairs of strangers off the street to play a game of Monopoly, but the game was rigged, clearly rigged. That they could see that one person had twice as much money at the start. They got to roll the dice twice instead of once in every go, and clearly, they had a huge advantage. And very quickly in the game, you could see on the video that power dynamics were starting to emerge. The people with the more money, they were now doing this, sitting back,
Mm.
banging the table loudly. They ate more of the snacks than the other person in every case. Um, and of course they won the game, right? But what was really interesting at the end of the game, when they were interviewed and asked how come they'd been more successful in the game, none of them mentioned the fact that the game had been rigged in their favor. They all said it was because they were a better player.
Of course.
So it was, yeah, so there's all these really interesting things going on when you put people in
Mm.
positions of power, and then you add to that then that you're less and less likely to be challenged because of
Mm.
the safety reasons of the of that, and you can see why. Oh, and the other thing is, once you get to a certain level of power and wealth, you don't hang out with normal people anymore. You hang out with people like you. You go to the events that are put on by McKinsey or the business school.
Yeah.
You read the same books. You live in a bit of an echo chamber now. Yeah. Whereas I quite think the German model is very interesting, where if you have over 2,000 employees, you must give 50% of the seats on the main board to employees.
Yeah.
Mm.
And I think this is a really interesting idea because it forces you back into reality almost.
Yeah.
Because you now have people on the board that are impacted by your dumb ideas instead of just people nodding along. So I think, yeah, this whole thing of power is a very fascinating area, really.
What about its cousin, empowerment? Because that is another popular concept.
Yeah, it is, and it turns out that that's not so easy, right? Because
Mm.
there's a few things going on. One is we have effectively conditioned people to uh, to seek direction and management. And there is some comfort in that because if you're at the bottom of the hierarchy and things go wrong, you can just go, "Oh, it was their fault. Those guys, look at those dumbasses doing it again." So there's some psychological comfort in not taking responsibility for anything. Um, and it also turns out if you genuinely want to empower people, you kind of have to make sure they're able to deal with conflict, um, and they have some emotional awareness on how to deal with other people. Because once you put them in a self-organizing construct, for example, they have to deal with their own stuff, right? They can't go running to a manager now when something goes wrong. So the corporate rebels guys in the Netherlands, they've been busy setting up a fund to try and buy companies, small companies, and put them into a much more self-organizing construct.
Mm.
But they've been finding that it takes 18 months to 2 years to really get people to make the head shift, to be able to operate well in this what is kind of genuine empowerment, I guess, rather than just kind of a bit of delegation. So it is possible, but it's not as simple as going, "Oh, look, you're all empowered now. Get on with it." It's people have to unlearn one set of kind of beliefs about the world and learn a new set. It looks like.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, and this it ties back to like the concept of who actually runs the company. You mentioned in the
Yeah,
beginning
yeah,
that
yeah,
employees like in the bottom layer actually have a lot of collective power, and that
yeah,
basically they could just not do the bullshit that is being put upon them.
yeah.
Uh, but why
But it's
don't more people rebel?
yeah. I do think it's this kind of comfort. I don't know if you've ever come across Barry Oshry's work in this space.
No.
He's a very obscure American academic. He started doing these things in the 60s where it was called the Power Lab, where he would bring in 20 strangers off the street, basically lock them up for a week in a compound, and create a virtual organization where you had what he called tops, middles, and bottoms and customers. And then he would set these experiments running. But he noticed after a few years that it didn't matter who he put in the experiment, the same patterns of behavior always came out. And one of the patterns of behavior was concerned with the people at the bottom of the hierarchy, who he said were oppressed, and didn't ever realize the collective power they had, or weren't, they were so comfortable being oppressed that they didn't ever try to
Mm.
organize themselves and fight back against some of the nonsense. They just felt that it was blindingly obvious that the leaders were in charge and that they just had to do what they
Mm.
were told. So it is curious because you think, right, oh, by the way, I didn't mention that there's some very bad effects of making people powerless as well at the bottom of the organization. Some research suggests that if you take away people's autonomy and if you subject them to a lot of job insecurity, which is what kind of happens at the bottom of these big companies, um, that was more predictive of early death than smoking or high blood pressure. So
Oh.
there's some really, and being very powerless also activates something called the behavioral inhibition system, which makes people much more risk averse and constantly kind of seek to avoid, putting themselves in the limelight. You just want to try and be safe, um, and that kills all sort of creativity and innovation. And then we wonder why, at the customer interface level, we don't get amazing service and amazing creativity. It's always crap, but we've kind of we've created a situation where we've made that impossible for people. By scripting everything, policing everything.
Mm-hmm.
We've kind of taken the humanity out of it to some extent, right? So yeah, there's lots of interesting dynamics going on there that would be a lot of fun to play with.
Yeah. I'm curious to ask you about something completely different.
Cool.
Like we briefly touched upon this fad of AI, which replaced the metaverse as the
Yeah.
new thing that everyone's falling behind on.
Yeah.
Like we chose perhaps dangerously so, to kind of ride the wave of that fad in Maneuvering Monday, where,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
well, I'm not going to spoil exactly what happens, but AI
No,
ends up playing a role in the end.
it does.
Uh, well,
Yeah,
why should CEOs tread carefully when it comes to AI? And
many. There are many reasons. God, where do you even start? So AI is you know, it it's got the wrong name for a start, right?
mhm,
Because actually the models, even though they're improving at quite a rate, none of them are actually intelligent. They are based on um, the probability levels of predicting the next word in a flow of words, and they, while they're on the surface very sophisticated, there's actually no thinking going on behind the surface, right? Um, and I see the use cases in some situations, but my fear is that consultants and the tech companies are selling this dream to CEOs that they can automate away a huge chunk of their workforce. Again, it's the people at the bottom of the hierarchy, right? That they can do away with them by using AI, and that's very dangerous because unless you actually know what people do, you can't really appreciate that, and you can make a lot of mistakes. In the book, I gave the example of a friend who was a teacher assistant, and if you looked at that from an organizational chart and job description point of view, you'd go, okay, what do they do? They help prepare the lessons, yeah.
mhm.
They mark some of the homework, yeah. Et cetera, et cetera. And you think, okay, well, we could just replace them with an AI classroom assistant that can do all that, right? It's easy. But if you talk to the teacher assistant, what they actually do is something that's not in the job description, is what they do, things like they take care of kids that come from really difficult backgrounds, who turn up
Mhm.
at school not having had any breakfast, and they use their own money to buy them food. They buy them clothes, sometimes they give them a hug. Often they're the only stability and love in that kid's life, you know. And if you take that away, you can risk a lot of damage to those kids,
Yeah.
because that's all they have. But people don't understand the nuances of this kind of thing. Let me give you another example. I flew to a small airport in France to go on a sailing trip. I had 7 massive suitcases of stuff, all piled up on the trolley. You could barely see me.
Yeah.
And I went to the car hire desk, and this lovely lady, um, she looked at me. She looked at all the bags, and then she said, "Oh, it's like a 10-minute walk to the car park where the car is, and there's steps and some other stuff."
Ooh.
And I was like, "Oh, yeah, damn." And she said, "Look, I'll tell you what. Don't worry. I think you're my last customer for a while. Why don't you go and have a coffee? I'll go and get your car and drive it over to the terminal, and I'll beep when I'm outside, and I'll just give you the
Oh
keys."
wow.
And
Yeah.
I thought, oh my God, like you can't train people to do this, right?
No.
Like you
No.
you either have to just really like people,
Yeah.
and you certainly can't train an AI model to do this. So I think it's risky because we've created these organizations where we've effectively killed people's creativity.
Mhm.
We haven't given them a chance to shine, and now we're going to fire them all and try to replace them with a robot. Um, and it's not going to go well. It's not going to go well. So I can see things going horribly wrong. They have gone wrong for quite a few companies already. Um, the city of New York got in trouble. It created a chatbot to advise small business owners on legislation. It started telling them all to break the law after a few months. Um,
Oh no.
yeah, yeah. McDonald's tried to replace some of their staff in the drive-throughs, until these videos started going viral of the AI ordering like thousands of chicken nuggets, and and doing crazy things like asking people if they wanted bacon on their ice cream and stuff like that. So it's there's a lot of money going to be wasted, and my other fear is that the book talks a lot about all the nonsense around things like well-being and performance management and engagement, and you can see actually that, hey baby, you can see that companies are now starting to try to automate some of the nonsense with AI.
Oh my
And
god. Yeah.
my favorite example is, HR is always hilarious in many ways, but what you've seen now is that a lot of HR has put AI into the recruitment space, right? So AI is now sifting through all your CVs and applications, and in some cases they have AI doing the first interviews, and it's hilarious because on the other side, everyone's now using the same AI to write the CVs and prepare for the interviews, right? So, and because they've effectively, because what AI has done is remove the effort in applying for a job, which you can now do with one click, they're deluged with thousands of applications that have to be sifted. And it's made the whole process actually worse for everybody because you now have thousands of people who aren't really interested in applying. They just applied. All their CVs are the same, so you can't tell any of them apart. You're trying to interview them with all this AI, which can't think for itself. It's like a comedy show. So yeah, it is. It is. It provides source for endless amusement. I can imagine comedy writers will be having some fun with this for a few years.
In the space of recruitment, my experience
Mm.
with AI has been completely hopeless. Like it is,
Yeah, yeah,
uh,
yeah,
it just it makes like it only creates more noise.
yeah.
And
More
the
noise.
best thing to do is just take it out because then that is much more
Yeah,
effective. And applicants
yeah. I
using AI has just made everything so much harder.
Yeah, and everyone's just becoming, the other side of AI is everyone's becoming incredibly lazy
Yeah,
intellectually because they're just defaulting to AI to write everything for them.
yeah,
And that's a big risk, I think. So it'll be interesting to see where it goes. Yeah, I suspect that a bit like the metaverse before it, it's a lot of it is hype. Um,
yeah,
People will invest a lot of money in it, but we'll see limited returns, I think.
yeah. Um, Paul, let's talk about the other side of HR, not just recruitment. But
Yeah,
in your book, you are clearly not too impressed with HR.
no.
How can HR actually be useful, or do they have a reason to exist at all?
It's something I've thought about a lot, actually. My first inclination was to get rid of HR as a thing, um, but I do think they have a space. I think, unfortunately, what's happened to HR is it's become kind of the entry point for nonsense into organizations, and the sort of unthinking execution partner for nonsense dreamt up by people in organizations. So a lot of the time, you'll get things like, someone will say, "Oh, well, McKinsey says that, we companies have a 39% chance of outperforming if they have more diversity on their executive and their boards," which, by the way, is completely untrue and has been roundly debunked by proper academics. Uh, um, but so now, oh, we better have a diversity team. We have to get on with lots of diversity stuff. So that's their kind of entry point into, letting nonsense into the organization. Um, but even more importantly, when somebody comes up with a restructuring idea or a transformation plan, HR gets called on to be the execution partner of some of this stuff. And when it all goes wrong, HR doesn't look good. It's not really their fault, but they don't provide any challenge. And the other very funny thing, like exactly what happened in your book, is for some reason, when anyone talks about culture, they go, "Oh yeah, that's HR's problem." We got
Yeah,
HR's job is to fix the culture, and the HR people as well convince themselves that their job is to somehow create this culture, as if you could do that from a HR department. It's kind of weird. It's a strange idea, right? Um, so they've created this situation where they're now the most hated function of any. I mean, people prefer finance than HR even. And, even the people that work in the profession, they know that everybody hates them. One of the most popular HR blogs in the US, written by a lady, and the title of it is "I Hate It Here." That's the title of the HR podcast. Um, is there a role? Yes, I think there is, right? Because what what I've kind of seen through the research in the book is that there's a there's a really overly rational perspective that's features in management. It's taught in MBA schools, it's taught on leadership development, and it's rewarded, and it's super rational and unemotional. And it assumes that organizations behave predictably, rationally, and not, that they're not crazy, which of course they are because people are crazy, right? Um, so there's something about Yeah, and then I talk about in the book about the dark side of efficiency, which, you can feel if you go to a Starbucks, for example, which I try never ever to do, it's incredibly miserable, right? It's
Yes.
yeah, it's so process driven. All the food's crap. It's designed for shelf life rather than taste. The employees look depressed. The furniture's grim. There's just nothing interesting about the whole experience. Um, they force you to give them your name for the coffee cup, which I always object to. I don't know why. It seems bizarrely personal and impersonal at the same time.
Yeah.
Um, and you compare that to, in the book I talked about two other coffee chains in London, which I love. Um, One has come from America, but it's this guy who's like was obsessed with making the freshest coffee in the world. So in the cafe, he's got like a roasting thing where he roasts the coffee every day in the shop. And then there's this crazy Willy Wonka kind of vacuum tube is going across the ceiling. And when you ask for your coffee, it sucks up exactly the right amount of freshly roasted beans, shoots them across the ceiling, drops them into the grinder, and gets ground just for your coffee. So it's like you couldn't get a better cup of coffee.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh yeah, I love this. This is amazing.
Yeah.
And
That's
it's like didn't care. He doesn't care about efficiency. He just wants like the best coffee.
in whimsy.
So this so efficiency is a kind of it sucks the joy out of things, and it's a race to the bottom,
Mm.
I think. So HR should be the kind of defender of humanity and creativity against this efficiency driven process thinking that's so endemic. It could also, be the one saying, well, where's the evidence for this stuff that you want me to do? Well-being doesn't make anyone well. Performance management is hopeless. Employee engagement is completely misguided. So, why don't we just stop doing all this stuff and do something useful?
Mm.
Yeah, I think that would be an interesting conversation for HR people to have.
I was just away or I was listening in, but I was just
Hmm.
feeding my baby for a minute. So I'm back now.
Yeah,
Sorry about that.
it's
Um,
okay.
I think we need to start kind of slowly wrapping up now. But we would actually like to shift gears a little bit and talk a bit about the publication uh,
Yeah,
process for both of our books.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and maybe Ivana, you can frame that.
Yes, Paul, when we talked during the pre-call, I think we discovered an interesting difference between how we wrote our books. We invited everyone in from the very first draft and had people come in and peruse. You had
yeah.
like a closed door approach where you sat down and wrote first. How was that for you? And why did you choose to write in this way?
It was great. I loved it. I
Okay,
didn't have
next
to talk
question.
to anybody. No, I guess because some of the things I was writing about they're reasonably controversial, right? And a lot of people hold things like culture and values and engagement and all that kind of stuff. They hold it quite dear and get very upset if you suggest that it's all nonsense. And so I just wanted to be able to be evidence led and not really think about people's opinions. And I wanted to write something that I wanted to write,
Yeah.
which was me going, right, I don't care what anyone thinks. This is what I think. And I don't care if you read it or not. I'm happy that
Mm,
I've kind of thrown it out there. Um,
mm.
yeah, I did get in trouble with Nicole, my wife, at one point where she's like, when am I going to see a draft? And I said, never. And she's like, do you not want my opinion? And I said, no, but don't take it personally. I don't want anyone's opinion.
You can
So
read the final printed book. You cannot.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's what I
Yeah.
said. Yeah, you can have it when it's published. So
Mm,
yeah, I made a choice not to engage with anybody because I thought that would maybe dilute my thinking or, make me a bit nervous. Even when I spoke about it with a couple of people saying this is the kind of thing I'm thinking about, they were like, oh, well, maybe you should tone that down a bit. That sounds a bit, a bit controversial. And I was like, no, no, no. I don't want to tone it. I don't want to tone it down. I want to tone it up, if anything.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's so funny. We had the exact opposite strategy. We had
Yeah.
like an extremely open door, and wanted as many people as possible to kind of listen in and taking part in shaping the story. But I think it's also two different
Yeah.
books because we have a
Yeah.
we wrote a fictional storyline.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, So it wasn't
But
so
it's
much, or it was our opinions, but it was also kind of, expressed through the life of a fictional
yeah, and
bunch of
I think
characters.
it's worked really well in your case because I think the book has got so many layers of complexity in it and nuance that I think I think that's worked really well for you guys. So congratulations, it's a great piece of work.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think for sure we would have ended up in a very different place if we had not involved
Yeah.
other people. Because then it would maybe have been a book about culture programs.
Well, maybe,
A piece of
maybe.
magnetic nonsense bullshit. No, no. I
Oh
think
dear.
I think it was a fun process, and especially getting to talk to all
Yeah,
these different people through. That was like my favorite part. Like we're
that's
doing right
fun.
now.
Yeah, and I think for me also, after writing the book, a lot of people have got in touch with me, and I've met, like you guys, I've met tons of interesting people, and I didn't expect that to be so fun after writing the
Yeah.
book.
Mm,
Yeah, and that's been
yeah.
really, really good.
Thank you. I think let's wrap up. We did prepare a question that kind of looks ahead, to
Yeah,
talk a bit about the state of work
yeah,
and just to wrap this episode up.
Yes. And Paul, like after reading your book, I was left with like both super entertained, juiced, but also in a sense of despair. Uh,
A bit depressed. Me too.
you're welcome. You're welcome.
and that is like my reflections were like it feels like globally we are in a state where tensions are rising. There's
Mhm,
more fear and uncertainty. The
mhm.
world is complex and unpredictable, um, and this feels like the environment where people will gravitate towards more bullshit and not less
Yeah,
because
yeah,
it
yeah, yeah,
is knowable and predictable.
yeah.
Um, so how do we uh, leave our listeners with some sort of something they can do in their daily life about how to avoid the bullshit and gravitate towards more a more data driven approach?
Yeah.
What can
This
the
is
individual do?
it's a really interesting question, and I think the answer might lie a little bit in trying to persuade people to be more evidence led. So actually, bringing the evidence into work with them, having some of those conversations about the evidence for some of this nonsense. But I think ultimately it'll come down to the small minority of leaders that are actually willing to examine their own beliefs critically. It's not for everybody, but there are a few of them around, and so I think it's trying to find those people to experiment to test things differently. Um, there's a curious story about a guy in I think it's the Belgian civil service who worked in some obscure department who has kind of under the radar turned it into a self-organizing team and done so well that by the time he announced it out in the open, no one could tell him not to do it anymore. So
Mm,
there is something about being a bit more like a pirate in this situation, maybe, and
mm,
just going and doing stuff under the radar with your own team or your own colleagues and doing it so well that by the time someone notices, it's too late to tell you to stop.
Yeah.
So maybe there's something about that pirate idea that people could
mm,
adopt. Because changing the whole system is very difficult, right? So
Yes.
maybe smaller changes to the bit that you can control and
mm.
see what happens, I guess. That might be the way
I,
forward.
I like the idea of just like as a small step, if you hear something that sounds a bit
Mm.
like nonsense, challenge
Yeah,
it or ask like, why are we doing this? What is the
yeah,
purpose
yeah,
of
yeah,
this?
yeah.
And I think that's I think that the times where Marie is successful in the story is actually where she manages to kind of address
Mm.
when something is where it's unclear why we're doing something.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
And it is, that influence skill that she had.
Mm.
That one is
Yeah.
really would be quite important in any effort to change anything. I think is having that ability to genuinely influence people in a way that makes them not feel threatened, but more curious
Mm.
about something, I guess.
I think
Yeah.
we can invite listeners to think about one small piece of magnetic nonsense in their work life that they can start,
Yeah.
changing or challenging, or yeah, at
Yeah.
least try to apply this mindset. I think it's
Or
helpful in all organizations.
yeah, or even just think about ways to seek more autonomy as an experiment would be also kind of fun, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
test the limits of the power you actually have.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But it's yeah, it could be just a bit of fun to
yeah.
have more. I think we all need to have a bit more fun at work, probably in general.
I agree.
Agreed.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. I think
brilliant.
let's wrap it up with these words. Thank you so much,
Yes.
Paul, for joining us on the show. It was
Thank
such a
you.
pleasure.
It's a lot of fun. A lot of fun.
Read Magnetic Nonsense.
Yes.
And Maneuvering Monday. Yeah.
Yes, please.